Tonight, we will tell you a story that delves into the surprisingly open and pragmatic world of ancient Rome. A story not of emperors or legions, but of everyday life and personal desires. You will learn how the Romans viewed human sexuality not as a hidden shame, but as a natural part of existence. We will explore the widespread use of certain objects, sometimes symbolic, sometimes practical, that served purposes we might consider modern, yet existed millennia ago. You will discover the cultural influences that shaped these practices and how they were integrated into the fabric of Roman society, found in homes and even depicted in public art. This is a journey back in time to understand a facet of history that often remains unspoken, revealing that human needs and expressions have a far longer and more continuous lineage than you might imagine. Oh, and if you enjoy these stories that illuminate the less-known corners of history, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. New sleep stories are released every day, designed to guide you into a peaceful rest. All right, find a comfortable spot, let your mind drift, and prepare to step into a time when the lines between the sacred and the sensual were often intertwined. To truly understand the story of these ancient objects, we must first set aside modern preconceptions and step into the Roman world, a place where human sexuality was viewed with a striking degree of candor and practicality. Tonight, I invite you to journey back to a time when the world was seen through different eyes, a time of grand empires, intricate laws, and a surprisingly pragmatic view of human nature. We will explore the fascinating world of ancient Rome, not through its legions or its emperors, but through a deeply personal, intimate aspect of daily life that often remains hidden in the annals of history. The invention and use of what we might call the first adult toys. It is a subject that reveals much about Roman society, its values, and its understanding of pleasure and the human body. The ancient Romans approached life with a characteristic practicality that permeated every aspect of their existence, from engineering magnificent aqueducts to meticulously organizing their vast administrative systems. This pragmatic mindset extended even to the realms of human sexuality. For the Romans, sex was not inherently a sin or a source of shame. Instead, it was viewed as a natural biological function, a fundamental part of the human experience, much like eating, sleeping, or working. Their society lacked the concept of original sin or the deeply ingrained moral prohibitions against physical pleasure that would become prominent in later historical periods, particularly with the rise and widespread adoption of Abrahamic religions. This is not to say that Roman society was without its own rules or boundaries. Indeed, it was highly structured and sexual conduct was certainly regulated. But these regulations were primarily concerned with social order, status, and public reputation, rather than with a universal abstract concept of moral impurity. A Roman citizen's sexual life was often judged by whether it upheld his or her social standing, contributed to the family's lineage, or maintained the stability of the household. For men, the crucial distinction lay in being the active participant, the penetrator, which was seen as a mark of power and masculinity. Being a passive partner, particularly for a free-born man, was generally considered shameful, as it implied a loss of control and a subversion of traditional gender roles. However, women, slaves, and foreigners who occupied different positions within the social hierarchy were subject to different expectations and could be targets of male sexual activity without the same social stigma being attached to the active partner. This complex interplay of social status, gender, and power defined the acceptable parameters of sexual expression, far more than any overarching moral code against pleasure itself. Public displays of affection or explicit sexual acts were generally frowned upon, not because they were considered sinful, but because they could disrupt the established social decorum and demonstrate a lack of self-control, a highly valued Roman virtue. Within the privacy of the home, however, or in spaces designated for pleasure, a different set of norms applied. In subsequent eras, particularly after the gradual decline of the Roman Empire and the ascendance of Christian doctrine across Europe, the perception of sexuality underwent a profound transformation. Concepts of chastity, abstinence, and the suppression of carnal desires became central tenets of moral and religious teachings. The human body was increasingly viewed as a vessel for the soul, and its physical urges, including sexual ones, were often deemed temptations that needed to be resisted or contained for spiritual purity. This shift led to centuries during which discussions of sexuality, especially female pleasure and non-procreative sexual acts, became deeply taboo. Objects associated with such pleasure were either destroyed, hidden, or simply ceased to be produced, disappearing almost entirely from public record and private life. The very idea of an adult toy would have been scandalous, an unspeakable concept in societies where even the contemplation of such items was considered sinful. This historical trajectory makes the openness of the Roman world, where such items existed and were seemingly accepted without widespread condemnation, all the more striking and historically significant. It underscores a fundamental difference in cultural values and the frameworks through which human desires were understood and integrated into daily life. Given this backdrop of pragmatic acceptance, it is perhaps less surprising that the Romans, alongside other ancient civilizations, developed and utilized a variety of objects designed for personal pleasure. These items were not seen as tools of vice or perversion, but rather as practical aids for self-gratification, an acknowledgement of the body's needs and desires. Their creation and use were simply another facet of daily existence, akin to tools for cooking or grooming. These objects often blended functional design with symbolic meaning, particularly the widespread use of phallic imagery, which, for the Romans, was not solely about sexual pleasure, but also deeply intertwined with concepts of fertility, prosperity, and protection against evil. It was a world where the sacred and the sensual could coexist, where the generative power of life was celebrated in both explicit and symbolic forms. These items were not relegated to the darkest corners of society, but were present in private homes, sometimes even depicted in art, reflecting a degree of social comfort with a topic that would later become shrouded in secrecy and shame. Tonight, you will learn how the phallus, as a symbol, permeated Roman culture, extending far beyond simple anatomical representation, becoming an emblem of good fortune and warding off ill will. We will explore how Roman practices absorbed and adapted ideas from the earlier, highly influential Greek civilization, shaping their own unique expressions of intimacy and pleasure. You will be introduced to Priapus, a minor Roman deity, often depicted with exaggerated features, who stood as a guardian of gardens and a powerful symbol of male generative force. We will discuss the diverse materials used to create these objects, from simple wood and leather to more elaborate clay or stone, and consider the practical, often humble nature of their craftsmanship. Most importantly, we will delve into the explicit purpose of these objects, moving beyond their symbolic roles to understand their use for personal sexual gratification, particularly by women, shedding light on a rarely discussed aspect of Roman intimate life. You will see how these items were integrated into daily life, sometimes openly discussed or even represented in public art, reflecting a unique degree of social acceptance. We will examine concrete historical evidence, drawing upon archaeological discoveries from sites like Pompeii, which have unearthed artifacts and imagery directly confirming the existence and widespread use of such items. We will also briefly touch upon how Roman poets and writers referenced these objects, indicating their place within the broader cultural discourse, sometimes with humor or satire. Finally, we will reflect on the enduring legacy of these ancient practices, underscoring the continuity of fundamental human needs and desires across millennia, demonstrating that these toys were not a modern invention, but a natural, albeit often overlooked part of ancient Roman daily life. So, settle in and allow your mind to drift back in time to a world where pleasure was simply another aspect of being human. The phallus was not just about pleasure, nor was its imagery limited to the private chambers of individuals. It was a profound and widespread symbol, woven into the very fabric of daily life across countless ancient civilizations, from the fertile lands of Egypt to the philosophical city-states of Greece, and most notably, within the pragmatic and robust society of ancient Rome. For the Romans, the image of the erect male organ held a significance far beyond simple biological function. It was a potent emblem of life itself, of boundless renewal, and of an untamed generative power. In a culture deeply connected to the cycles of nature, to the bounty of the earth, and to the vital necessity of human continuation, this symbolism was not merely abstract. It was intensely practical and universally embraced. The Romans understood, with a directness that might surprise you, that abundance sprang from fertility, that the very existence of their families, their crops, and their livestock depended on this fundamental force. You would encounter its depiction everywhere, not secreted away in hidden corners, but openly and proudly displayed. It was a common, almost ubiquitous sight in Roman homes, meticulously carved into household objects, boldly painted on vibrant wall frescoes, and often worn as personal adornment. This pervasive presence was not driven by a singular focus on explicit sexuality in the way modern societies might interpret it, but rather by its profound and deeply rooted association with the fundamental forces of fertility, good fortune, and potent protection. Consider its role as a constant visual invocation, a tangible charm against the uncertainties of existence. In a world where agricultural yields were precarious, where devastating plagues were a constant threat, and where the continuation of one's lineage was considered the highest duty and blessing, any symbol that promised life, fostered growth, and ensured abundance was embraced with an almost religious fervor. The phallus, with its undeniable and direct connection to procreation, stood as the most potent and unambiguous representation of this life-giving force. It embodied the very essence of creation, the primal power to bring forth new life from the fertile soil, from the breeding of animals, and most significantly, from the union of human beings. It was a promise of continuity, a bulwark against the ever-present specter of barrenness and extinction. This deeply ingrained belief extended far beyond the simple concept of fertility. The phallus was also revered as a powerful apotropaic symbol. The term apotropaic, originating from ancient Greek, precisely describes anything believed to possess the power to ward off evil, deflect misfortune, or repel malevolent influences. The Romans, like many ancient peoples, lived in a world permeated by superstition and unseen forces. They held a profound belief in the evil eye, malus oculus, a malevolent gaze cast by envious or ill-wishing individuals, capable of inflicting illness, bad luck, or even death upon the unsuspecting. To counteract this pervasive and insidious threat, they employed symbols that were potent, often exaggerated, and sometimes deliberately shocking, designed to deflect, absorb, or simply scare away the negative energy. The phallus, with its raw, unbridled vitality, its overt power, and its unmistakable assertion of life, was considered an exceptionally effective defense. Its explicit and forceful nature was thought to startle, disgust, or overwhelm evil spirits and ill fortune, compelling them to recoil and retreat from its formidable presence. You would frequently observe small, carefully crafted phallic amulets, known as fascinum, worn conspicuously by children, particularly young boys, suspended around their necks or pinned to their clothing. These protective talismans were specifically intended to shield them from harm, illness, and the malevolent gaze, while also encouraging their healthy growth and ensuring their future virility. Beyond childhood, Roman soldiers too carried similar charms, often made of bronze or carved from bone, into the crucible of battle, seeking not only protection from physical injury, but also a boost to their virility and martial prowess. Even the beloved animals essential to Roman life, such as horses and dogs, were occasionally adorned with phallic images on their harnesses or collars, believed to keep them strong, healthy, and safe from harm. Within the privacy of Roman homes, the phallic symbol was seamlessly integrated into an array of everyday objects, transforming the mundane into the sacred. You might discover it subtly incorporated into the design of a common household utensil, or more prominently, adorning decorative items. For our journey through the intimate world of ancient Rome now naturally leads us further back in time, to the profound influence of a culture that shaped so much of the Roman world, that of ancient Greece. While Rome was an empire of innovation, engineering, and law, it was also a civilization that deeply admired, absorbed, and adapted the rich cultural tapestry of its Hellenic predecessors. The Romans did not invent pleasure, nor did they invent the concepts of fertility and sensuality. Instead, they inherited a great deal from the Greeks, refining and integrating these ideas and objects into their own unique societal frameworks. Consider the pervasive nature of Greek culture across the Mediterranean. As Roman legions expanded their dominion, they encountered and eventually incorporated lands rich in Greek heritage, from the philosophical schools of Athens to the bustling ports of Alexandria and the vibrant Greek colonies in southern Italy, known as Magna Graecia. Roman aristocrats sent their sons to study in Greece, learning the language, philosophy, and arts. Greek tutors were common in Roman households. This cultural exchange was not a one-way street of conquest. It was a complex process of admiration and assimilation. The Romans saw in Greek culture a sophistication and an aesthetic refinement that they sought to emulate and often to surpass. This admiration extended to the more private and personal aspects of life, including expressions of sexuality and fertility. The phallic symbols we discussed earlier, so prevalent in Roman homes and public spaces, had a strong precedent in Greek culture. The Greeks, too, celebrated the phallus as a powerful symbol of fertility, prosperity, and protection against evil. It appeared on their pottery, in their sculptures, and perhaps, most famously, on the herms, stone pillars topped with the head of a god, often Hermes, and featuring an erect phallus at mid-height. These herms were placed at crossroads, doorways, and in gardens, serving as boundary markers and symbols of good fortune and potency. The Romans readily adopted this practice, seeing the practical benefits of such a potent symbol. Beyond the purely symbolic, the Greeks also possessed objects intended for personal pleasure, known as olisbos. These were, in essence, dildos, crafted from various materials. They might be carved from wood, molded from leather, shaped from clay, or even fashioned from stone. Their designs were typically simple and functional, reflecting a pragmatic approach to satisfying human desires. These objects were not hidden away in shame. Rather, they were part of the practical realities of life, openly discussed in certain contexts, particularly within the works of playwrights and poets. For instance, the Greek comedic playwright Aristophanes, writing centuries before the Roman Empire reached its zenith, made references to such devices in his plays, often with humor, indicating their presence and general knowledge within society. The very existence of these objects in Greek culture provided a clear template for the Romans. When the Romans encountered these Greek customs and objects, they did not recoil in moral outrage, as later, more conservative societies might have. Instead, they incorporated them, often with their characteristic practicality. The concept of using objects for sexual gratification was simply another facet of human experience, one that was neither inherently virtuous nor inherently shameful, provided it did not disrupt the social order or violate legal norms. Roman women, in particular, may have found these objects useful, especially given the social structures that might limit their sexual agency or access to partners. While Roman society was patriarchal, it was also pragmatic, recognizing the needs and desires of all its members, albeit within defined boundaries. The availability of such items, whether acquired through trade or crafted domestically based on Greek prototypes, would have been a quiet yet significant aspect of their private lives. The materials used for these olisbos would have been similar to those found in Greece: smooth wood, often olive wood, which took a fine polish, hardened leather, perhaps stuffed with soft materials, or terracotta, which could be shaped and then fired, sometimes with a glazed finish to make it more comfortable. Even bronze or lead might be used, providing a different weight and sensation, though these would likely be less common due to their cost and rigidity. The craftsmanship would vary from simple, unadorned pieces to more elaborately carved or decorated examples, perhaps featuring grooves or textures for added sensation. These were not mass-produced in factories, but rather handmade by artisans, or even by individuals in their own homes, reflecting the personal and often intimate nature of their use. The adoption of Greek concepts extended beyond physical objects to the very understanding of pleasure and fertility. The Greek pantheon, with its often very human and sexually active gods, provided a framework for understanding and expressing desire. While the Romans renamed many of these deities, Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, Aphrodite became Venus. The underlying myths and the acceptance of divine sensuality remained. This acceptance of the gods' often explicit sexual escapades trickled down into mortal society, creating a cultural environment where sexual expression, even with the aid of devices, was not inherently taboo. The Dionysian cults, centered around the god of wine, revelry, and ecstatic pleasure, were a prime example. While Rome eventually sought to control and regulate these cults due to their perceived excesses, their initial appeal and the adoption of their practices, which often involved uninhibited sexual expression, demonstrated Rome's openness to Greek forms of pleasure. Thus, when we look at the toys of ancient Rome, we are not witnessing an isolated invention, but rather a continuation and evolution of practices and objects that had deep roots in the vibrant and sensually aware world of ancient Greece. The Romans, with their characteristic ability to absorb and adapt, took these elements, made them their own, and integrated them seamlessly into the fabric of their daily lives, from the grandest public temples to the most intimate private chambers. This cultural osmosis created a society where the pursuit of pleasure and the means to achieve it were neither hidden nor reviled, but simply accepted as a part of the human condition. Our journey through the ancient world now brings us to a figure whose very image embodies the essence of fertility and protection in Roman daily life. This was a minor deity, yet one whose presence was ubiquitous in the Roman landscape: Priapus. He was not one of the grand Olympian gods dwelling on a mountaintop, but rather a more earthy rustic divinity, intimately connected to the land, its bounty, and the very act of creation. His origins are somewhat varied in myth. Some stories claim he was the son of Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. Others tell a more curious tale, suggesting he was born from an event involving Hera, who, in a moment of pique, caused him to be born with his most prominent and defining feature already exaggerated. Whatever his true lineage, Priapus came to Rome largely through Greek influence, much like many other aspects of their culture. You would have found Priapus not in grand temples, but in the most practical and vital spaces of Roman life: gardens, vineyards, orchards, and even at the entrances of homes. He was the protector of these places, a guardian against thieves, and a benevolent force ensuring abundant harvests and flourishing livestock. His primary role was to guarantee fertility in all its forms, from the fruits of the earth to the reproduction of animals, and by extension, the prosperity of the family itself. This explains his most striking and universally recognized depiction: a figure often crudely carved from wood or stone, with an unusually large and erect phallus. This exaggerated feature was not meant for shock or titillation, but served a deeply symbolic and practical purpose: It was a potent symbol of generative power, an undeniable affirmation of life, growth, and the ability to produce. Beyond representing fertility, Priapus's prominent phallus also served a powerful apotropaic function. In the ancient world, people believed strongly in the evil eye, the malevolent gaze of envy or ill will that could bring misfortune, sickness, or barrenness. The phallus, particularly in its erect state, was considered a highly effective ward against such dark influences. Its overt display was thought to divert evil, to shock it away, or even to absorb it, thereby protecting the crops, the livestock, and the very inhabitants of the home from harm. Thus, a statue of Priapus, standing sentinel in a garden, was not merely decorative. It was a vital part of the spiritual defense system of the property, a silent, ever-vigilant guardian. Imagine walking through a Roman villa's garden, the scent of herbs and flowers in the air, and seeing these figures, sometimes small and unassuming, sometimes larger and more imposing, standing amidst the plants, their purpose clear to any who understood the prevailing beliefs. The materials used for these effigies were as varied as their locations. Often they were simple wooden carvings, perhaps just a rough trunk with a head and the defining feature carved into it. Other times they might be fashioned from terracotta, stone, or even bronze for wealthier households. The craftsmanship varied from rudimentary and rustic to more refined artistic expressions, yet the core iconography remained consistent. These were not idealized sculptures meant for aesthetic admiration in a gallery. They were functional objects, imbued with spiritual power, placed precisely where their protective and generative influence was most needed. Their very crudeness sometimes added to their power, suggesting a raw, untamed force of nature. The presence of Priapus, with his unmistakable attributes, normalized the open display of the phallus in Roman society. It was not hidden away or considered shameful. Instead, it was integrated into the fabric of daily life, seen as a natural, even divine symbol of life's essential forces. This widespread acceptance of phallic imagery, sanctified by its association with a protective deity, created a cultural context where objects related to sexual pleasure could also be viewed with less inhibition. If the symbol of male generative power could stand openly in a garden, warding off evil and inviting abundance, then the physical manifestations of that power, or objects designed to emulate it, could also find their place within the private sphere of human intimacy. This cultural environment meant that discussions and depictions of sexuality, while perhaps not always polite, were certainly not taboo in the same way they would become in later eras. Roman poets like Catullus or Horace might reference Priapus, sometimes with humor, sometimes with genuine reverence for his protective qualities. His image appeared in frescoes adorning the walls of homes, in mosaics on villa floors, and even on small amulets worn for luck or protection. He was part of the visual vocabulary of the time, a constant reminder of the primal forces that governed existence. For the Roman citizen, particularly those connected to agriculture, Priapus represented a direct link to the earth's fertility and the continuation of their lineage. His presence in the garden was a plea for prosperity, a hope for plentiful harvests, and an acknowledgement of the raw, vital energy that underlies all life. He was a symbol of the very abundance that the Romans, a pragmatic and expansionist people deeply valued. Their understanding of the divine often intertwined with the practical aspects of their world, and Priapus was a perfect embodiment of this fusion. He was a god you could see, touch, and whose influence was directly perceivable in the flourishing of your crops or the health of your animals. This embrace of Priapus and his symbolism provides a crucial lens through which to understand the Roman approach to sexuality and pleasure. It suggests a society that, while having its own moral codes and social distinctions, did not view the human body or its functions as inherently sinful or shameful. Instead, they were seen as natural, powerful, and, when properly channeled, beneficial forces. The phallus, as personified by Priapus, was a source of power, protection, and life, rather than a source of embarrassment or guilt. This cultural foundation laid the groundwork for a broader acceptance of diverse expressions of sexuality, including the creation and use of personal objects designed for pleasure, which we will explore further. The Roman world, therefore, was not one of hidden desires and suppressed expressions. It was a world where a god embodying explicit male generative power stood openly in plain sight, a silent testament to a different set of values. His image, often rustic and unrefined, spoke volumes about a society that valued practicality, fertility, and the warding off of ill fortune above almost all else. And it is within this context that we can truly begin to understand the development and acceptance of personal pleasure objects, which, in a society so open about the very symbol of generation, would not have seemed out of place at all. The figure of Priapus, therefore, stands as a key to unlocking a deeper understanding of Roman intimate life, a bridge between the symbolic and the very personal. He reminds us that what might seem shocking or explicit to modern eyes was, for the Romans, simply a part of their everyday reality, a vital element in their pursuit of a prosperous and protected existence. His unwavering presence guarding the harvest and the home serves as a powerful illustration of the Roman worldview, where the sacred and the sensual were often inextricably linked. From the omnipresent symbolic representations that adorn the walls of homes, guarded thresholds, and even protected fields, and from the benign yet potent imagery of Priapus, the deity of generative power, our narrative now smoothly transitions to the very objects themselves. What were these items that served purposes ranging from protective amulets to personal aids for pleasure? What materials did the skilled hands of Roman artisans, or indeed the resourceful hands of ordinary Romans, employ to bring these forms into being? And what does their craftsmanship reveal about the Roman mindset regarding such intimate objects? The answers paint a picture of practicality, resourcefulness, and a surprising degree of openness. The most widespread and perhaps most accessible material for crafting these objects was undoubtedly wood. Trees were abundant across the vast Roman Empire, offering a readily available and relatively inexpensive resource that artisans could easily acquire and work with. Artisans would select various types of wood, each with its own unique properties. Oak, known for its strength and durability, would have provided a robust base. Pine, being softer, might have been easier to carve, allowing for quicker production. Olive wood, often associated with warmth and a beautiful grain, could lend a more refined feel to the object. Boxwood, dense and fine-grained, was excellent for intricate details and a very smooth finish. The process was straightforward, yet required skill. Blocks of wood would be carefully shaped using chisels, knives, and rasps. The artisan's goal was always to achieve a perfectly smooth, splinter-free surface, which would then be meticulously sanded, perhaps with fine volcanic ash or abrasive leaves, to ensure maximum comfort during use. Once shaped and smoothed, the wooden objects might be treated with natural oils or waxes, not only to preserve the wood and enhance its natural luster, but also to provide an even more pleasant tactile experience. The natural warmth of wood against the skin, its organic texture, and its quiet resilience made it an ideal choice for intimate personal items, embodying a natural connection that resonated deeply with Roman pragmatism. These wooden forms varied greatly in size and contour, some explicitly anatomical, others more stylized or abstract, catering to diverse preferences and requirements, yet always maintaining a focus on ergonomic design and ease of handling. Their durability meant that they were not disposable items, but rather long-lasting companions, perhaps passed down or simply cherished for years within a private household. Another exceedingly common material was clay, or terracotta, literally baked earth. This humble yet incredibly versatile medium was central to Roman daily life, used for everything from massive amphorae for wine and oil to delicate oil lamps and figurines. For the creation of intimate objects, clay offered unparalleled malleability. Artisans could hand mold the wet clay into virtually any desired shape and size, allowing for a high degree of customization and artistic expression. Once molded, the objects would be carefully dried and then fired in kilns at high temperatures. This firing process transformed the soft clay into a rigid, durable ceramic. The surface of these fired clay objects could be left in its natural earthy reddish-brown state, or it could be smoothed and polished. Sometimes they might even have been coated with a slip, a thin liquid clay solution, to create a finer finish, or painted with pigments before or after firing. While more brittle than wood or stone, properly fired terracotta was remarkably resilient and, crucially, non-porous, making it a hygienic choice for repeated use. The ability to create a perfectly smooth and uniform surface was a significant advantage, and the cool touch of ceramic could also provide a distinct sensation. The variety of forms achievable with clay was immense, from simple, unadorned shapes to more elaborate, perhaps even humorous designs, reflecting the individual preferences of their creators or users. For those of greater means, or for these objects, then, were not merely symbolic curiosities, nor solely representations of a god's power, or even general fertility charms hung in public spaces or worn as amulets. Their very design, crafted with care from various materials, hinted at a more direct and intimate purpose, one deeply woven into the fabric of Roman private life. Beyond their visible presence in gardens or on the necks of citizens, many such items served a profoundly personal function. They were, in essence, tools for individual satisfaction, often employed by women seeking private pleasure or comfort. In Roman society, the public display of male sexual power, as embodied by the phallus, was common and accepted. Yet, the sexual lives of women, while acknowledged as essential for procreation and family continuity, were often viewed through a lens of male control and expectation. Marriage was a social and economic contract, and while Roman women enjoyed more legal freedoms than their Greek counterparts, their sexual experiences within marriage were typically framed around the husband's desires and the imperative of producing heirs. Divorce was possible, and women could inherit property, but their intimate lives were still largely defined by societal norms that prioritized male gratification and lineage. However, beneath this structured surface, there existed a more nuanced reality of private desire. For Roman women, whose agency in public life was limited and whose sexual expression within marriage might not always align with their personal needs, these crafted objects offered a discreet avenue for self-exploration and pleasure. Imagine a woman, perhaps a matron of a wealthy household or a freed woman with more autonomy, in the quiet solitude of her private chambers. The cool, smooth surface of a polished bronze piece or the surprisingly yielding texture of a carefully shaped leather item might have provided a sense of intimate comfort. These were not tools of procreation, nor were they meant for public display in the same way a garden priapus might be. They were personal possessions, kept hidden away, perhaps in a carved wooden box or a linen pouch, to be brought out only in moments of solitude. The design of these objects, whether simple and straightforward or more elaborately carved, was functional. They were shaped to be held, to fit the contours of the human body, and to provide sensation. Some might have been crafted from wood, perhaps olive or cypress, carefully sanded until smooth to the touch. Others fashioned from clay, fired and sometimes glazed, offering a slightly rougher yet still agreeable texture. More luxurious items could have been made from bronze or even ivory, materials that carried a certain weight and coolness, or warmed slowly with the touch of the skin. The goal was not artistic grandeur, but rather practical utility in the pursuit of physical satisfaction. This personal use by women is a significant, if often overlooked, aspect of Roman intimate history. It speaks to a recognition of female sexual needs, even if that recognition was confined to the private sphere. Unlike some later historical periods where female sexuality was suppressed or demonized, Roman pragmatism, combined with a general lack of moralistic condemnation of pleasure itself, as long as it didn't disrupt social order, allowed for such practices to exist without widespread public outcry or systematic persecution. There was no religious doctrine condemning such personal acts, nor was there a powerful institutionalized morality that sought to regulate every aspect of private desire. The emphasis was on maintaining social order and public decorum, and what happened behind closed doors, as long as it remained private and did not challenge established hierarchies, was largely beyond the scope of official concern. Thus, these objects served as quiet companions in the intimate lives of Roman women, providing an outlet for desires that might otherwise have gone unaddressed. They stand as a testament to the enduring human need for pleasure and self-discovery, a need that transcends time and culture, and which the pragmatic Romans, in their own way, acknowledged and even facilitated through the creation of these very personal, very private toys. They represent a facet of life that was perhaps rarely spoken of openly, but was certainly understood and accommodated within the privacy of the Roman home. These objects whether crafted from smooth, polished wood, supple leather, durable clay, or even more luxurious materials like finely carved ivory or gleaming bronze, were certainly not intended to be hidden away in forgotten, dusty corners, nor were they subjects of furtive whispers exchanged in hushed tones. Their very existence within the broader Roman society was, in many profound ways, a direct and striking manifestation of the pragmatic and remarkably open approach to human sexuality that so deeply characterized this ancient civilization. They were integrated into the rhythms of daily life with a candidness that often strikes modern sensibilities as surprisingly frank, even astonishingly unblushing. You would encounter these intimate items, or at the very least, clear and ubiquitous representations of them, not only secreted away within the most private recesses of homes, such as the cubicula, the intimate bedrooms, but quite frequently within more visible domestic spaces, and even in their symbolic forms, permeating the public sphere. Imagine, if you will, the serene atmosphere of a Roman villa, whether it was nestled amidst the vibrant, ceaseless bustle of a great metropolis like Rome itself, or situated in the tranquil calm of a sprawling country estate. Within those bedrooms, it is undoubtedly where one would anticipate discovering objects primarily intended for personal pleasure. They might have been stored with simple discretion, perhaps nestled within a lacquered wooden chest, or placed unassumingly upon a small, elegant shelf, much like any other personal belonging that served a functional yet private purpose. There was a notable absence of overt shame or moral condemnation attached to their mere presence. The quiet hum of domestic life simply accommodated them. The ancient, cool stone walls of a typical Roman dwelling undoubtedly harbored many secrets, many private moments, but the presence of such intimate items was generally not considered a profound secret to be guarded with deep shame, nor was it viewed as a mark of hidden transgression. Instead, it was simply accepted, a quiet, unremarkable facet of human experience, like the presence of bathing oils or fine linens. Consider for a moment the vibrant and enduring frescoes that richly adorn the interior walls of these very homes, particularly in the spectacularly preserved cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, places eternally suspended in time by the sudden, catastrophic ashfall of Mount Vesuvius. While a great many of these elaborate depictions portrayed scenes of classical mythology, grand historical events, or simple, charming vignettes from everyday life, explicit we know of this everyday acceptance, this integration of the phallic symbol and objects of pleasure into the very fabric of Roman life, not merely from literary accounts or artistic depictions. We have tangible, irrefutable evidence, preserved across millennia, brought to light by the patient work of archaeologists. Perhaps the most striking and illuminating of these sources comes from the shadows of Mount Vesuvius, from the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. These were thriving Roman towns, bustling with life and commerce, until a cataclysmic eruption in 79 A.D. buried them beneath layers of ash and pumice. This tragic event, however, created an unparalleled time capsule, preserving not just buildings and grand artworks, but the minutiae of daily life, the intimate details often lost to the ravages of time and subsequent human activity. When these cities were rediscovered and excavated centuries later, what emerged from the ashen embrace of the past was a vivid, sometimes startling portrait of Roman society. You could walk through the streets enter homes and visit shops, and in doing so, you would encounter the phallus in almost every conceivable form. It was not hidden away, but openly displayed, woven into the visual language of the community. For instance, many doorways in Pompeii still bear carved phalluses, often accompanied by wings or bells intended as apotropaic charms, objects meant to ward off evil and bring good fortune and prosperity to the inhabitants. You might see them carved into the paving stones of the streets, guiding you towards the city's brothels, known as lupanars, or adorning the walls of public baths. These were not considered obscene. They were functional, symbolic, and part of the general cultural understanding of fertility and protection. The very act of stepping over a threshold adorned with such a symbol was an acknowledgment of its power, a silent blessing sought before entering a home or a business. Beyond these overt symbolic displays, the archaeological record also reveals objects whose purpose was clearly for personal pleasure. In private residences, within the remnants of bedrooms or intimate spaces, excavators have unearthed artifacts crafted from various materials. You might find objects made of wood, smooth and worn from use, or perhaps of hardened clay, sometimes beautifully shaped and polished. Bronze, too, was occasionally used, offering a distinct weight and coolness to the touch. Leather, easily molded and durable, was another common material for such items. These items varied in size and form, reflecting individual preferences and the craftsman's skill. Their presence in these personal settings underscores the fact that the Romans, particularly women, engaged in practices of self-pleasure with objects specifically designed for that purpose. These were not necessarily luxury items, but rather everyday tools for personal satisfaction, much like other household implements. The sheer variety and commonality of these finds, spread across different social strata, suggest that their use was not an anomaly, but a widely accepted, if private, aspect of intimate life. You can almost imagine the quiet moments in a Roman home, the soft glow of an oil lamp, as these objects were used, a testament to the enduring human need for comfort and pleasure. The careful excavation of the lupanars in Pompeii, for example, has offered further insights. Within these establishments, frescoes depicting sexual acts, some quite explicit, adorned the walls, serving as a kind of menu or advertisement for the services offered. Among these depictions, and sometimes found as physical objects within these spaces, were representations and actual items that reinforced the understanding of the diverse forms of sexual expression and the tools employed. The atmosphere in these places, preserved under the ash, speaks volumes about a society that viewed sexuality with a pragmatism that might surprise you. It was a part of life, often commercialized, but also openly acknowledged. The rooms themselves were small, often with simple stone beds. But the artistry on the walls was often vivid, painted in rich, earthy tones that still retain some of their vibrancy today, even after centuries of exposure. The discovery of a wide array of Roman lamps, for instance, also reveals much. Many of these lamps were molded into phallic shapes or depicted explicit scenes. These were not just for illumination. They were decorative items, sometimes humorous, sometimes serving as conversation starters, and sometimes perhaps even used in more intimate settings, casting a soft, flickering light on private moments. The fact that such items were openly sold and used in homes rather than being concealed speaks volumes about the differing moral codes of the time. The Romans did not possess the same sense of shame or prudishness that would later characterize many Western societies. For them, the body, its functions, and its pleasures were natural, a part of the human experience to be enjoyed and celebrated, not condemned or hidden away. These lamps, often made of terracotta, humble in material but rich in implication, could be found in kitchens, courtyards, and indeed, bedrooms. Beyond Pompeii and Herculaneum, other archaeological sites across the Roman Empire have also yielded similar findings, though perhaps not with the same dramatic preservation. In various villas and urban centers, fragments of mosaics, sculptures, and small artifacts continue to confirm this pervasive presence of phallic imagery and objects related to pleasure. These discoveries collectively paint a clear picture. They move beyond theory or supposition, offering concrete proof that ancient Roman society was remarkably open regarding sexuality. The phallus, in all its forms, from the protective amulet to the personal pleasure object, was an undeniable presence. It was part of their superstitions, their humor, their art, and their private lives. The materials might have been simple, wood, stone, clay, leather, bronze, but their meaning and function were deeply embedded in the daily reality of the ancient world. You can almost feel the smooth, cool stone of a carved charm, or imagine the simple, comforting weight of a wooden object unearthed from the silent dust of a long-lost home, brought back into the light after nearly 2 millennia, offering a silent testimony to a past that was both familiar and profoundly different. Beyond the tangible remnants unearthed from the ashes of places like Pompeii and Herculaneum, which offer silent material proof of ancient Roman intimate life, a richer and perhaps more nuanced understanding of these personal objects comes directly from the words of the Romans themselves. Their vast and varied literature, ranging from the cutting wit of satire to the passionate verses of love poetry, offers invaluable glimpses into a society that, while certainly valuing public decorum and social propriety, was also remarkably frank and pragmatic about human desires and the diverse means by which they were satisfied. These written accounts, though often indirect, subtly suggestive, or veiled in layers of humor and satire, consistently confirm that such instruments of personal pleasure were not merely isolated curiosities for a select few, but were indeed woven into the very fabric of Roman intimate and cultural life. The esteemed poets, playwrights, and satirists of Rome, intellectual giants like Gaius Valerius Catullus, Marcus Valerius Martialis, more commonly known as Martial, and Publius Ovidius Naso, Ovid, frequently painted vivid, detailed, and often unvarnished pictures of Roman society in all its complexity. Within their extensive body of work, one can discover subtle and at times quite explicit allusions to these personal aids. It is important to understand that these literary references were not, of course, presented as explicit instructional guides or technical manuals for use. Instead, they served as reflections of a deeply human culture that, while possessing its own complex moral codes and societal expectations, fundamentally understood pleasure as a legitimate and natural part of the human experience. Humor, wit, and irony were very common vehicles for these discussions, allowing authors to address sensitive topics without overtly challenging established norms. These literary devices were often employed to lampoon exaggerated sexual appetites, to playfully mock an individual's perceived lack of desirability or sexual prowess, or, perhaps most intriguingly, to hint at the secret, private indulgences of otherwise highly respectable citizens. This light-hearted, often indirect approach allowed for widespread discussion and acknowledgement of these aspects of life without causing outright scandal or transgression of the era's social boundaries. Consider, for example, the work of Martial, a master of the epigram, a short, witty, and often biting poem designed specifically to amuse, provoke, or comment on contemporary life. Martial's epigrams frequently delve into the intricacies of Roman social dynamics, personal relationships, and sexual mores. He sometimes made veiled yet clearly understandable references to marital satisfaction or, more frequently, marital dissatisfaction, occasionally implying the use of such intimate aids when human partners, for various reasons, fell short of expectations or desires. His observations, though often sharp and pointed, resonated deeply with his vast audience because they touched upon relatable, albeit often unspoken, aspects of private life. The humor inherent in his verses often lay in the recognition of a shared, perhaps even universal truth about human nature and its needs, a truth that could be acknowledged through a knowing glance or a shared chuckle. Martial's ability to capture the essence of Roman life, including its private dimensions, made his work enduringly popular. Similarly, Ovid, a poet whose name is almost synonymous with love and eroticism in Roman literature, particularly in his more instructional or overtly erotic works such as the Ars Amatoria, the Art of Love, or the Amores, frequently discuss the multifaceted dynamics of pleasure, courtship, and seduction. While Ovid's primary literary focus remained on the intricate dance of human relationships, the art of winning a lover, and various sexual techniques between partners, his broader and more philosophical discussions of personal fulfillment and the pursuit of delight could, and often did, implicitly acknowledge the full spectrum of intimate practices. He might eloquently describe a woman's deep yearning for satisfaction or a man's often elaborate efforts to achieve it, thereby creating a literary and cultural context where personal aids, though rarely explicitly named in detail, fit seamlessly within the unspoken understanding and shared knowledge of the era. Ovid's extensive work consistently explored the pursuit of delight and contentment in all its myriad forms, reflecting a sophisticated Roman society that, for all its public gravitas, certainly did not shy away from the intimate topic of sexual pleasure and its complexities. Even the more restrained and philosophically inclined poet Horace, known for his elegant odes and insightful satires, might touch upon themes of luxury, indulgence, and the pursuit of a comfortable, pleasurable life, particularly among the elite. In such broader depictions of Roman living, intimate items, while certainly not the main focus, could naturally fit into a larger picture of refined or even decadent living. These literary mentions were not typically moral condemnations or expressions of shock. Rather, they were often presented as astute observations of how people chose to live, sometimes accompanied by a gentle critique of excess or a wry commentary on human folly, but almost never with outright moral outrage at the mere existence of tools designed for pleasure. The Roman literary world in general was characterized by a remarkable willingness to depict the full and diverse range of human behavior, even its most private and personal aspects, though always presented through the sophisticated lens of their own unique cultural norms and artistic conventions. The profound significance of the fact that these topics could even be alluded to, whether indirectly, subtly, or through the clever veil of humor and satire, within widely read and publicly consumed literature, speaks volumes about the ancient Roman mindset regarding sexuality. While the inherently private nature of these objects meant they were not openly displayed or formally discussed in polite public discourse, their existence and their widespread use were undeniably part of the unspoken, yet universally acknowledged fabric of Roman society. They were not viewed as scandalous or inherently immoral in the same way they might be perceived in much later, more puritanical historical eras, where even the slightest hint of such a topic could lead to widespread condemnation, social ostracism, or even legal repercussions. Instead, for the Romans, these items were simply another, perhaps private aspect of life, subject to the same keen wit, insightful observation, and occasional gentle mockery as any other human endeavor, ambition, or foible. This pervasive societal openness, tempered perhaps by a natural sense of discretion for truly private matters, stands in stark and fascinating contrast to many subsequent periods of Western history. The Roman approach was fundamentally pragmatic, acknowledging rather than denying the diverse and complex landscape of human sexual expression and its needs. Thus, the concrete archaeological finds, unearthed from the very ground the Romans walked upon, are not isolated curiosities or anomalous discoveries. Instead, they are powerfully echoed, confirmed, and enriched by the vibrant and extensive literary landscape of ancient Rome. These literary references, whether overtly humorous, subtly satirical, or gently suggestive, provide invaluable cultural context and depth, demonstrating that these objects were not merely niche items used by a fringe minority, but were indeed fundamental elements woven inextricably into the broader tapestry of Roman intimate culture. They collectively reveal a complex and stratified society that, for all its emphasis on order and public virtue, possessed a truly remarkable degree of candor and realism about the pursuit of personal pleasure and satisfaction, leaving behind a profound and multifaceted legacy that stretches far beyond their simple forms. This powerful connection between the physical artifacts and the rich written word allows us to truly piece together a more complete, authentic, and human picture of how the ancient Romans lived, how they loved, and how they found satisfaction in their daily lives, unequivocally demonstrating a deep and continuous thread of human needs and desires that transcends the vast expanse of millennia. And so, as we have journeyed through the intricate tapestry of ancient Roman life, examining their views on intimacy, their symbolism, and their practical ingenuity, we arrive at a profound realization about the nature of human history itself. We have seen how the Romans, a people renowned for their engineering, their laws, and their vast empire, also possessed a deeply pragmatic and open approach to human sexuality, an attitude that might surprise many in our modern era. Their world was one where the phallus was not merely a symbol of male potency, but a pervasive emblem of fertility, good fortune, and even protection against malevolent forces, adorning everything from frescoes in private homes to the very streets of their bustling cities, carved into doorposts and hanging as amulets around children's necks. This widespread acceptance was a stark contrast to the more constrained attitudes that would emerge in later historical periods, reminding us that societal norms around intimacy are fluid and ever-changing, shaped by the prevailing philosophies and moral codes of an age. The Roman approach was rooted in a naturalistic view of the body and its functions, seeing them as integral parts of the human experience rather than subjects of shame or strict taboo. We explored how Roman culture, ever adaptable and expansive, readily absorbed and refined ideas from the sophisticated Greek civilization that preceded it, incorporating their understanding of pleasure and their artistic representations into their own unique expressions. The figure of Priapus, the minor Roman deity often depicted with exaggerated phallic features, served as a vivid embodiment of this cultural exchange, standing guard over gardens and vineyards, a constant reminder of life's generative power and the abundance of nature. His ubiquitous presence in Roman art and everyday objects underscores the uninhibited nature of their public and private discourse surrounding sexuality. The objects themselves, crafted from a variety of humble yet durable materials such as polished wood, supple leather, molded clay, or carved stone, were not ornate works of art designed for mere aesthetic display. Instead, their simple, functional nature speaks volumes about their intended purpose. They were tools designed with a clear understanding of the human body and its capacity for pleasure, crafted to be both effective and discreet, fitting seamlessly into the domestic sphere. Beyond their symbolic and ritualistic functions, we established that these objects were indeed employed for personal sexual enjoyment. This was particularly true for women, a detail that offers a rare and valuable glimpse into the private, intimate lives of Roman women, suggesting a degree of agency and exploration within their personal spaces that is often overlooked in historical accounts. These tools provided a means for self-pleasure, an important aspect of human well-being that transcends cultural barriers and historical epochs. The remarkable social context of these objects further illuminates the Roman mindset. They were integrated into daily life with a surprising lack of shame or secrecy, found openly in private residences, depicted in erotic art on walls, and occasionally even referenced in the casual banter or satirical verses of Roman poets and playwrights. This openness reflects a distinct cultural acceptance, a recognition of human desires as natural rather than inherently sinful or hidden, fostering an environment where such items could exist without eliciting widespread moral outrage. The undeniable evidence from archaeological discoveries, especially those unearthed from the volcanic ash that preserved Pompeii and Herculaneum, provides concrete proof of their existence and common use. The vivid frescoes depicting intimate scenes, the household artifacts found in bedchambers and private rooms, and the very layout of private spaces within these ancient cities speak volumes, confirming that these items were not exotic curiosities or clandestine objects, but rather an integrated part of everyday Roman life. The very fact that these objects were found alongside mundane household items suggests their ordinary presence. Literary references, though sometimes veiled in humor or poetic metaphor, further corroborate this, showing that these objects were part of the cultural lexicon, understood and recognized by the populace, sometimes serving as props in comedies or allusions in love poetry, highlighting their place in the collective consciousness. And so, we conclude our journey by reflecting on the profound historical legacy of these ancient Roman toys. They serve as a powerful testament to the enduring continuity of human needs and desires across millennia. They remind us that the quest for pleasure, for intimacy, and for self-exploration is not a modern phenomenon, nor is the ingenuity applied to fulfilling these fundamental human impulses. Long before the advent of industrial manufacturing or digital connectivity, the people of ancient Rome, with their practical minds and their uninhibited approach to the physical world, had already invented and utilized objects designed explicitly for adult pleasure. This revelation challenges any preconceived notions that such items are solely a product of contemporary society, or that the open discussion of sexuality is a recent development. The Romans, in their own unique way, demonstrate a historical precedent for a society that acknowledged and accommodated these aspects of human experience without the layers of moral judgment that became prevalent in subsequent eras. These artifacts are not just historical curiosities. They are echoes of a shared humanity, bridging the vast chasm of time between their world and our own. They demonstrate that the desire for physical gratification and the innovation to achieve it are deeply woven into the fabric of human experience, a constant thread running through the tapestry of civilizations. The Romans did not invent pleasure itself, but they certainly invented and normalized tools to enhance it. Tools that were a natural part of their daily existence, not something to be concealed or condemned. Their legacy is a quiet but firm rebuttal to the notion that such personal objects are a product of contemporary society alone. Instead, they stand as a quiet reminder that the human story, in all its complexity, including its most private moments, often repeats itself across the ages, revealing universal truths about who we are and what we seek. This exploration of Roman intimacy offers a valuable perspective, suggesting that rather than viewing the past as inherently more primitive or puritanical, we should recognize the diverse ways in which different cultures have approached the universal aspects of human existence. It encourages a broader understanding of history, one that embraces the full spectrum of human experience, including the often unspoken facets of private life. As you drift into sleep, consider how much of our present is truly new and how much is simply a continuation of the ancient past, echoing through time with a quiet, enduring presence, inviting you to rest deeply with the knowledge that human nature, in its fundamental essence, remains remarkably constant.